Welcome, Madhavan. It's nice to meet you. Thank you for having time for us. Today, I would like us to talk about monetizing innovation, which, by the way, is the title of your book. A very good one, an interesting one. I strongly recommend it. And I'd like us to talk about pricing strategies for innovative products, but also about how the crisis influenced pricing and monetizing innovation. So we'll hopefully discuss some ideas from your book, but also touch some new areas. So let me start with the question about the main premise of the book, which is that instead of creating an innovative product and then setting the price for it, companies should do the opposite. Set the price first and then create a product. Could you please explain why it makes more sense than the traditional approach?
Yeah, thanks, Paul. So the traditional approach to innovation has always been, let's really build our product, obsess over the innovation, engineering and products lead the conversation. And often pricing is an afterthought, where after you build the innovation, you think about, okay, what should the price be to actually get the market that you actually deserve? This is how innovation has been done since the age of time, right? I mean, I've worked now with Simon Kucher in Silicon Valley for the last 13 years, and I've seen this obsession to, great extents where people would build products, call us and say, okay, hey, we need your help with monetizing them. And I would say, okay, how long do we have? They would say we need it right away, but they would have probably taken 2 years to actually build the product. If you take a step back and look at what happens, the failure rate in innovation is super high. I mean, we actually benchmark that about 72% of innovations actually fail to monetize, or they don't actually meet any kind of commercial goals. And, coupled with that, kind of reaction, you actually see that the failure rate in innovation is even higher in areas like Silicon Valley. But when you take a step back and look at it, the classic phrase that comes to mind in these companies is they spray and they pray. That is the classic way of actually innovating. What we talk in the book is to invert their thinking. In other words, truly understand what customers need, what they value, and what are they willing to pay for before you sort of make your innovation, so that you can maximize your chance of success, and you're not just hoping that your innovation will actually make money at the end of the day. So it comes down to doing a lot of testing and learning whether your products would be successful in the market before you release it, so you maximize your chance of success. That is the thesis of the book.
All right. So you mentioned this statistic that says that 72% of innovative products entering the market actually fail to stay there. And this statistic applies to big and small companies equally. So yes. Why do you think this rate of failure is so big?
Yeah, so it comes down to the same discussion of like postponing pricing to the very end, where people are probably just hoping that they actually, can make money on their innovations. I mean, and this is true across the board, from startups to big companies. If pricing is an afterthought and you're only obsessed over building your products, you're just hoping at that point. I mean, the classic sort of entrepreneurial mindset is, build the products and they would come. And that is totally untrue in this kind of modern age, especially. And there are so many avenues to, really understand whether your customers would actually want your product, would they need it, and would they actually be willing to pay for it much before you, sort of launch your innovation. And why wouldn't you do that? That's what the 28% of companies actually do. And that is also what we codified in the books as secrets of how to get to breakthrough innovation.
Yeah. And when the top managers ignore the price at the beginning of the product creating process, what can go wrong? I mean, what are the most common failure scenarios in monetizing innovation? As a reader of your book, I know that there are 4 of them, right?
Yes, that is 4 of them. In terms of monetizing innovation failures, if you actually postpone pricing to the very end. And I think these kind of failure types will bring it to light why these failures actually happen, which was your kind of your previous question, right? So the first monetizing innovation failure type is what I call as a feature shock. So these are products where, there's simply too much going on. It is over-engineered and over-featured. And often if you hear things like, let's just add this in, our customers don't know what they want, and you probably end up building a feature shock, right? I mean, and because it's over-engineered and overbuilt, chances are it's also overpriced. And because it's overpriced, people probably not need these kind of products. And at the end of the day, a one size, fits none. because you built it thinking that everyone would need it, but it just appears an excess for most people, right? The way to undo a feature shock is to practice restraint and build products in, let's say, segments based on what segments of customers might actually need, what they value and what they're willing to pay for. But when entrepreneurs put everything into one product, they would create a feature shock. And this all happens in even some of the most successful companies of our times, right? I mean, if you take Amazon, one of the most successful companies, but when they actually launched Fire Phone, they had a plethora of features that people simply did not need. I mean, MarketWatch, for instance, documented all of the features that people didn't want. There was one feature where there were 4 cameras to actually track your eyeball movement, so that you didn't need geeky glasses to get 3D perspective. Sounds cool, but would you pay for it? Hell no, right? I mean, so the phone launched at $179 in 6 months. It was 99 cents. In another 3 months, they wrote off the entire business. This is a classic example of building a feature shock, which is just over-engineered. And at the end of the day, no one has a willingness to pay for this kind of over-engineered products, right? That's the first one. The second type of monetizing innovation failure is what we call as minivation. So these are actually products that are absolutely the right product market fit. As in, the entrepreneurs of the company simply had a lightning in the bottle. Everyone loved this idea. The product was great. But the thing that they didn't do is they didn't have the courage to charge the right price. And the worst kept secret in the room is they all know they could have done better, even though their product was awesome, right? To give you an example, one of the semiconductor companies here in Silicon Valley, they actually produced this groundbreaking chip, which is supposed to revolutionize consumer electronics, right? And there's this thing called Moore's law in semiconductors, where there is an expectation that price would decrease over a period of time. But they actually came up with some net new innovation that there was no parallel in the industry, and it was game changing. So they said, let's undo Moore's law. So how do they price? They said the price of the product should be 85 cents because the previous generation was 65 cents. Well, the products flew out of the shelf, and they claimed it as success, but everyone knew they could have done better. When they actually went and did a postmortem with their clients, what they actually found is consumer electronic companies could actually charge $50 premium up to from people like you and I because of this part actually being inside those consumer electronics. And when you look at 85 cents for $50 of value, that is simply unfair. And their clients were actually joking, saying that if you could have asked all the way to $5 and we would have paid you. So this is a classic example of an innovation where you left a lot of money on the table because you simply did not have the courage to ask the right price. Yes. And the only way to undo an innovation is to practice that courage and really test your pricing to see, what is the price that is aligned with your value, right? So that's 2 of them. The third monetizing innovation failure type is what I call as hidden gems. So these are products that, kind of completely go against the grain of your company. You postpone all of these, discussions around pricing to the very end. You don't know what is going on. It goes so much against the grain that often you don't productize it and even release the product, right? Yeah. The classic example of this is Kodak. I mean, they had the IP for digital photographs back in the 1970s, yes. Right? But they never productized it. They didn't bring it to the market because they were worried about cannibalizing their, sort of existing business. The rest is history. They probably live a bit more on patents, right? I mean, companies like, for instance, Autotrader.com or Cars.com in the US are excellent examples of companies that harness the hidden gems, because these companies actually started from the Atlanta or the Chicago newspapers when they realized that newspaper ads are going to go away because of an inflection point like the internet. And they actually productized a company as a 2-sided marketplace to buy used cars. And now these companies are multi-billion-dollar companies in their own right? Hidden gems actually happen often when there's an inflection point, like offline companies going online, online going offline, hardware company trying to do software, and so on and so forth, right? Especially coming out of this sort of pandemic, there's inflection points all around us. Companies trying to go digital, for instance. There are hidden gems waiting to be uncovered. If you don't go looking for them, you're not going to find them, right? The monetizing innovation failure number 4, which by far happens to be my favorite, is what I call as an undead. These are products like in classic science fiction, movie fashion, you should have never launched because they come back to haunt you. And they come in 2 flavors. They're either the wrong answer to the right question, or they're an answer to a question no one cares about. Yeah. Either way, productizing it was probably not something you should have done. And it's a classic, innovation failure type where you keep postponing the pricing discussions to the very end, that you just simply don't even know what to do with the price, and you put it out in the market and hope for the best. And again, it happens in some of the most famous companies, and also in early stage startups and not so famous ones. But one of the best companies of our times, Google, when they actually released Google Glass, it was an undead on arrival. It was just no one wanted it at $1,500, but maybe the paparazzi used it for 2 weeks and it was gone, right? But if you think about Google Glass as an innovation, had they actually productized it for business segments, I would argue that there was willingness to pay for this, because if as a doctor or a technician, if I can have my hands free when I'm doing my operation, or if I can have my hands free when I'm doing repairs, there's probably a need for this. People might have actually valued it, and maybe they're willing to pay for it. So we actually argued in Monetizing Innovation that a better strategy for undoing an undead like a Google Glass would have been to actually productize to like business use cases, and sort of bring that to market, rather than just making something, put a price and throw it out for the consumer side. Not sure if someone at Google actually read the book, but we hear through the grapevine that they're actually working on Glass being a B2B product now. So
all right. So how to avoid those 4 common failure scenarios? In your book, you describe 9 rules of successful monetization. Could you please try to present them in a compact way?
Yeah, presenting them in a compact way is always going to be a challenge, but I'm going to try my best, because
it's almost half of the book.
Yeah. You wrote a book on it, right? So,
yeah.
But the way to undo, all of these 4 failure types and actually go to the 5th category, which we call breakthrough success, is to adopt a 9-step, innovation framework that we actually put in place. It is codified in the book, and it's also what we actually preach with many companies that we actually work for, right? So this 9 steps actually starts with having the early willingness to pay conversation, and goes all the way to like maintaining your price integrity. Just to give you, the flavor for your audience on a few steps, I would say maybe if I take 3 steps that are very critical for, innovative companies, early stage companies, etc., or even, bigger companies doing innovation in a net new product, etc., right? So the first one is having that early willingness to pay conversation. Without this, you would not be able to productize something that actually makes sense. And we actually talk about how to have that conversation in the book. So I will avoid that piece, but the why is probably more critical, right? Because as an entrepreneur or a company, you actually don't have a choice whether you will have a pricing conversation with your customer. You can build the product, slap on a price and hope to monetize, or truly have this conversation early. The only thing in your control is not whether you will have the conversation, but when you will have the conversation. You can have it early. So what we mean by having the early willingness to pay conversation in a nutshell is have that same sales and marketing conversation that you will have with your customers much before you actually bring the product out in the market. Yeah. And if they don't bite, chances are they won't bite after your products are released. It's as simple as that, Paul, right? So having that conversation, and then having that sales and marketing conversation, and then ask the most important question: will you pay for this innovation? If someone says no, the most important question to ask is why. And often you hear a lot of things to reorient your products and design based on what customers need, what jobs you're actually solving for them, what are their pain points, and what are they actually willing to pay for. In the book, we talk about many tactics on how to actually exactly have that conversation to have a good read on the willingness to pay in the market based on needs. And I would ask your audience to probably check it out if that's of interest. But that's the very first step. If you don't do it, you cannot prioritize your R&D roadmap, period, right? Or you're doing it the wrong way. You can always do it, but you're probably doing the wrong way. The second probably important step that I would say is kind of avoiding this sort of trap of a one size fits all, right? I usually say one size fits none, because if you build just one version of the product, it probably does not resonate with any one audience. You're building for an average customer that does not exist. Whether you like it or not, your customers are always heterogeneous in their needs and preferences. And the whole point of monetization is to understand this heterogeneous needs so that you can differentiate and productize based on those needs. This is the secret to unlocking monetization power. Let's take a very simple example to prove my point, right? If you take water that we drink, in a fountain, it is free. You put it in a bottle, it's $2. You put gas in it, it is $2.50. If you throw it in the minibar, it's $5. It is the same damn water. At the end of the day, it's productized, packaged differently because different people have different needs and different willingness to pay. I mean, I might be price sensitive and I would just drink for free in a fountain, or I might want to carry my bottle around, so I have $2. I might have a preference for gas, so that's $2.50. Or I might just need the convenience in the mini bar and I'm lazy to actually go down to the first floor to drink water and I just need it in my room for $5, right? I mean, either way, even at that core, like a common product like water, if you can productize and package differently, I would argue you can do this, for every single company in this planet. So unlocking that segmentation and productizing is the key towards profitable growth. If you take, for instance, Apple, the world's most profitable company, if they had just built one version of the iPhone and priced it at, let's say, $99 because they thought that was the best price to clear the market, they would have under-monetized like crazy. There is a price from everything from $299 all the way to $1,499. If you take a step back and look at it, what they have done is productized to different price points, not just priced the product. This is the core thesis of the book. We actually say the subtitle, Monetizing Innovation, is design the product around the price. And this is probably well illustrated by Apple. And I would say the third important step in the framework, often I kind of tongue-in-cheek say that how you charge is way more important than how much you charge. Because when you think about pricing, most people gravitate towards, how much should I charge for this? How you charge for it is even more fundamental, right? So to take an example, for instance, Michelin tires, right? I mean, tires are actually probably one of the most price sensitive segments. I mean, think of it this way, right? You probably enter a store or you go to a digital, store or a physical store, you see all of these tires, they all look the same, they're priced differently. How are you supposed to make a decision, right? I mean, so the price sensitivity in this market is by definition there. But then Michelin actually came up with a truly innovative tire that was actually supposed to last, 20% longer than normal tires. So if they went and asked for 20% more premium, there is no chance they would actually get it. And if they don't ask it, they will cannibalize their business because the tires will last for 20% more. And basically that means people postpone their decisions to buy another tire by 20%. So what they actually did was fascinating. They came up with a new way to actually monetize. So the how you charge question was fundamental. So what they did is they said, and these were tires actually for truckers to move goods from point A to point B. So what they actually did is they said, let's price the tires based on a per kilometer or per mile basis, rather than the usual way of per tire basis. The result was game changing. These tires, lasted for 20% longer. So of course, on a per kilometer, per mile basis, Michelin recovered that, but they actually got much more than that. Why? Because the truckers loved this model. First, they could pay as they go. They didn't have to put, intensive capital to get things like tires. But the beautiful thing was it was aligned with how they were actually operating with their customers. So now the truckers could go and say, hey, Paul, your job was 798 kilometers, and this is the cost of the tire. And they could actually pass on the cost of the tire to their customers. How cool was that in that market? That was something completely unheard of before these kind of innovations came in place, right? So the how you charge is way more important than how much. This is probably the story behind many successful companies. Like if you take in Silicon Valley, Google has their own monetization model. I mean, Facebook, Uber, any of these have very unique and appropriate pricing models for their businesses, of course, which have led them to actually grow to where they are. And the how you charge often beats how much you charge. So these are 3 steps. We talk about the entire 9 steps, from having the willingness to pay conversation to maintaining a price integrity. I would welcome the audience to probably skim through the chapters and get an essence for the rest of the steps.
All right, thank you. So let's assume I am the owner of a company that didn't check clients' willingness to pay before introducing a new product. I've read your book and now I know I made a mistake. Yep. Is there a hope for me? I mean, what would I do to improve the chances of my product that is already on the market?
Yeah, absolutely, there is hope. First of all, I don't see innovation as a stagnant thing that, okay, you had it in the market and then you can't do anything about it. I mean, constant innovation is part of like every company, in the sense that even if you have a product in the market, you can probably bring another product in the market in the, sort of, let's say, near future, right? So all of the principles that we talk about in the book would apply for your net new products. But at a fundamental level, at the end of the day, you can test and learn and understand what is the right thing to do and pivot. There are various ways to like migrate your existing customers to, like, let's say, newer monetization models. I mean, we work with many Silicon Valley companies here, for instance, who have, just launched the product, but it didn't really take off, or it is kind of a miniation. What we do is we then come up with the right strategy for monetizing that innovation, assuming, like, if you had to redo this, what would it be like? We follow the same 9 steps in the book, and then we come up with, like, what should they actually do? I mean, I took the example of Google Glass. If I was consulting to Google, I would say, hey, let's grab this and just build this for B2B. And here are the 3 or 4 segments that actually make sense. Find it, productize it, and move the product into those kind of markets, right? So there is absolute hope for an entrepreneur, even if they have actually launched their product, to actually use these steps. Frankly, there are a lot of steps that can be used without even changing a single thing in the product. For instance, one of the steps that we actually talked about is, unless you speak the value, no one will get it, right? What you build is features. What your customers realize is benefits, right? In mostly product companies, they talk about the features that they have in the product. They don't talk about the benefits. We talk about an example in the book from a company called SmugMug, where they did not change a single thing in the product. What they changed was how they communicated the value. So instead of communicating features, they said, okay, let's communicate benefits. Like the ability, for instance, to sell photo online is a benefit for them. But there's a number of features that actually enable that. Once they communicated based on benefits, they could achieve double-digit improvements in revenue without any changes to the product. So there are a lot of steps in the book that can be applied for existing products, either in terms of how you change the way you monetize, how you position the value, behavioral things that you can use. So more than hope, I would say there is a strategy for your entrepreneurs who probably have launched stuff and are struggling. And the book is the secret to their success.
Okay. So let's move to the question associated with the crisis. How willingness to pay changed because of the global pandemic? I mean, people seem to be more cautious, obviously, nowadays. But are they really less willing to pay a good price for products they need?
Yeah. So I would say there are 2 things that have happened broadly because of the pandemic, right? One is, definitely there is a sense of, like, let's say, price sensitivity in certain markets, or the willingness to pay for certain categories of products have simply, sort of either disappeared because of the pandemic or is less because of the pandemic. Like, for instance, if you take, any of the industries in travel or tourism, I mean, the willingness to pay is lower because not many people are actually willing to travel, take their holiday, like make their flights and so on and so forth. So in those kind of businesses, the price, it's not that the price sensitivity has depreciated, because the demand is actually less. And the people who actually want it are also willing to pay less because of the pandemic. I think that, and there are people who also decrease price to increase demand. So for various reasons, you actually see, price sensitivities in these kind of markets. The other thing that has happened because of pandemic is by far more interesting. The willingness to pay has actually gone up for many services. I mean, there are 2 types of companies that we actually have seen mostly in the pandemic, right? I mean, and most companies fall in this. Either they have struggled because of the pandemic, because, their demand just sort of vaporized, or 20-30% of their business was gone, and they had to, like, struggle with how to actually keep up. And the other types of businesses have actually had a demand spike, and they have benefited from this crisis, right? I mean, if you take, for instance, any of the, let's say, delivery platforms, for food delivery platforms, or any of the digital companies which were trying to actually, get into, like, households. Now, because people are trapped inside their house, or at least in most of the, world, what happens? They actually open up their phone, use the app, and actually start using these kind of products. So for many of these companies, 2025 happened in 2021. So for those types of companies, it's not like there is price sensitivity. There is incremental sort of willingness to pay for goods and services from customers because of the convenience that these kind of products actually offer. So those are broadly the two things. And I would say for these two themes of companies, like either you're struggling or you saw a kind of demand spike, there are different things that you could do to preserve your price integrity so that you don't come back after the pandemic and you've just completely given the farm away and you struggle again.
Yeah. So can the right approach to pricing be actually a protection for a company in times of crisis? What do you think?
Yeah. So I think that kind of goes back to like, which archetype are you right now in the crisis, right? I mean, let's take the two archetypes that I talked about, which is one that's struggling and one that's seeing a demand spike. And what you actually do for pricing for both of these companies is dramatically different in my view, right? So for instance, if you take the companies that are, let's take the easier one where you see the companies are actually seeing their demand spike like crazy. What should they actually do? If they go and increase their price, for instance, because the demand is higher, they might actually come across as like price gouging. And that's absolutely the wrong thing to do, by the way, right? I mean, because then you just alienated your user base. There could be backlash if you don't do that properly as a price increase. I mean, unless you were completely not monetizing previously and now there's a chance to monetize because you saw some demand, right? But there are some smarter things to actually do. For instance, for those companies, they could actually focus on creating more premium lines of services. Because when you're onboarding more and more customers because of the demand spike, chances are there's going to be a portion of the customers who are actually willing to pay more for premium services. And can you productize that? So to take an example, for instance, let's say if you're in a delivery platform, like a food delivery platform or any kind of delivery platform, right? If I come up with a service called rush delivery, like where I can actually give it to you in like 1 or 2 hours, maybe there's a finite amount of people who are actually willing to pay for rush delivery. But if you didn't have rush delivery and you're seeing this kind of demand, can we productize that and operationalize it so that you can monetize on those kind of services? This goes back to my example of water. What kind of use cases can you find to productize to different needs of the segment? There is going to be a segment that values time and wants the rush delivery. And there's going to be a segment that actually is willing to wait and they're price sensitive. And if you didn't understand the segmentation, you're probably missing a lot of opportunity if you're one of those companies that are seeing a demand spike. But I think the far more dominant pattern that we are seeing is companies losing demand because of the crisis and the pandemic, unfortunately, because of things that are actually going on around us. And on average, we see 20 to 30% decline in revenue in these kind of companies. For these companies, probably it's super tempting to like lower the price, right? Because you'd say, okay, we're not seeing the demand, let's just lower the price and hopefully we will make it up. I would argue that this is absolutely the wrong thing to do. And the number one thing that I would caution, companies that are struggling to meet their targets, if you just lower the price, it is often doesn't mean that you will get the demand. Maybe the elasticity was never there. I mean, people might not even need the product, or there could be many reasons why the demand might not come. And even if it comes, it does not compensate the, let's say, 20, 30% price cut that you would have probably made, hoping that you would get an incremental demand. It's usually absolutely the wrong thing to do. And most importantly, if you do a price cut in these times, it is not just a one-time thing. You're actually going to train your customers to expect the same product for the lesser price when things actually pick up. And you're going to struggle to actually make money when things are booming. So you're actually going to hurt yourself double, like right now and when things pick up. But then obviously the question is, okay, what should these types of companies actually do, right? So I would say the easiest way to think about holding the line on price, first of all, is to think about 3 non-pricing actions or concessions that you can do before dropping your price, right? So think about that. Have that question as the first question to ask. What are 3 things that I can do other than price to like increase, my demand or like get more share of the market? For example, can you give more product for the same price and preserve your price rather than reduce price. That's by far a better strategy to do in a pandemic. Because, for instance, let's say I'm a software company that has 3 versions of the product. Very, typical in, let's say, software, good, better, best version of software, right? Can I actually give a customer who is, paying me for the good version of the software, a better version of the software at the same price? And the way I would frame this is, hey, the pandemic is, really on us. We are investing on our customers for a limited time of a year. We're actually giving you the better product at the same price so that you can enjoy more benefits on us. That's a value conversation. Even though you decrease price as in the best product to the good product price and gave it to someone, guess what happens when the pandemic is over, 1 year happens, you can actually renew these contracts at the better price. That's exactly what you and your customers agreed to. And they also know that they got more value. So like giving more value to preserve price is by far a better strategy than decreasing your price and creating price sensitivities. That's one non-pricing action that you can take. Another non-pricing action that you can probably take is, can you, for instance, get more flexible with payment terms? So like, for instance, if you're a B2B company, you could say, okay, hey, I'm not dropping my price, but because of the pandemic, what I can do is I would agree for a 60 or 90-day payment terms. Let's say the normal mode of operation is 15 or 30 days, which actually gives more time for the other company to actually pay you. And they might actually appreciate that, but because cash in hand is, valuable for any kind of company running their P&L. So they might say, okay, that's actually acceptable to us rather than a lower price. And you might be able to convert, these kind of sales. Or a third thing that you could also do, which is by far more interesting, goes back to like one of the steps that I talked about in the 9-step framework. Maybe it's time to change how you charge. So I'll give you an example. For instance, one of the companies that we actually, work with, let's just say, for sake of anonymity, let's say they make a software for the travel and tourism space. Okay, they actually used to charge based on a per month basis, a fixed price, whatever, right, for the software to be used. Now, the whole industry is in this example is facing a challenge. So it's not like the software is actually being used a whole lot, right? Before the pandemic, they had a struggle to actually move towards more of a usage-based model. Because if you actually have a fixed price that everyone is paying, chances are someone is paying you more, someone is paying you less, and others are paying you a bit in the average. The better strategy to often do is to orient your pricing based on usage, and maybe see if that's a better option for you. It's the same thing as the Michelin example. Can you charge on the per kilometer? So based on the usage, you'll actually end up paying. So what they did is, they changed their pricing model to a per use basis. This actually works super well for them because what have they done? They have retained all of their customers. Because if someone doesn't pay, they're not going to actually, so someone doesn't use, they're not actually going to pay for the product. But the people who are using would pay. But the most important thing is when the pandemic is over and things get back to where things were, the usage model will recover for them much more than a fixed price model that they had in the past. So the how you charge conversation became much more easier for them now to actually pivot towards a model that made sense to preserve and retain customers now, but also plan for future monetization when things actually pick up. So arguably, there are many things that you could do to preserve your price integrity. These are probably some of the top 3 ways that we have seen companies in the pandemic right now who are struggling. They can, but there are many such ways. I mean, my favorite example is also to look back at the previous crisis and see what did companies do in those times. I mean, as the saying goes, when there's a lot of wind, most people hide, the best companies build windmills. And there's a reason for this, right? I mean, if you look at, for instance, one of my favorite examples from the past crisis, not the current one, was actually Hyundai. And what they actually did was they came up with a flexible payment term for consumers. They said something like, return your car if you lose your job. That was such a simple statement. And what happened?
Yeah.
They actually gained 5x market share during the crisis.
Yeah.
Right.
Amazing.
I mean, so at the end of the day, this comes down to how you think about it strategically during tough times. Tough times are what brings the best in companies. So I would encourage your audience, entrepreneurs, companies to really take a look at monetization carefully. Now's the time to act. Now's the time to plan and strategize. And, there is definitely a method in the madness. Dropping the price would be the absolute worst thing to do.
All right. Thank you so much, Madhavan. I had some more questions, but you answered all of them. So
the best way to answer a question is to preemptively answer questions.
Yes, exactly. So thank you so much. It's been a pleasure to talk to you. Thank you for your insights. I'm looking forward to your presentation or our event, Digital Pricing, the part of our Elite Leadership Program on March the 4th. So thank you. Thank you so much. Bye-bye.
Thanks, Paul. Thanks for the opportunity. Glad to be here.
It's been a pleasure. Bye-bye.
Thank you.